My wife, having killed a man with a sniper rifle, had sex with her abusive partner. 15 years of marriage. That's what I thought we had, a solid foundation built on trust, love, and the kind of history only time can create. Rachel and I met back in college when I was a shy sophomore, and she was already the kind of person who could command a room without trying. She had this spark, a confidence that made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world to have her in my life. Together, we built what I thought was a dream life. 2 amazing kids, a cozy home, and a routine that, while predictable, felt comforting. But lately, that foundation has felt shaky. It started with small things: Rachel's frequent absences, unexplained late nights, and her sudden obsession with her phone. I brushed it off at first. She works in the military as a sniper, a job that's as demanding as it is dangerous. It wasn't unusual for her to go on assignments or come back with stories that sounded like they belonged in an action movie. Still, something was different. She'd laugh at messages on her phone and abruptly stop when I walked into the room. Her excuses about late-night briefings sounded rehearsed. Even the kids noticed. "Why is Mom always busy?" our youngest, Emily, asked one night at dinner. I shrugged it off with a smile, but inside, I felt like my stomach was tied in knots. Last week, Rachel came back from a 2-week assignment. She was her usual confident self, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She was colder, distant in a way that felt deliberate. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words felt clipped, calculated. I chalked it up to the stress of her job, until the day we held our family's usual welcome-home dinner for returning soldiers. It's a tradition in our neighborhood. Families gather at the park to celebrate the safe return of loved ones from deployment. Rachel insisted we go, so we packed up the kids, grabbed some food, and headed over. That's when I saw him. His name was Marcus, a younger guy, tall, broad-shouldered, with a crisp uniform that screamed hero. He was her partner on the last assignment, she explained, but something about the way she introduced him made my skin crawl. "Marcus, this is my husband, John," she said with a tight smile. Marcus smiled back, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion, maybe. "I didn't realize you were married," he said, glancing at Rachel. My heart stopped. She hadn't told him. I didn't let on that his comment had hit me like a freight train. Instead, I shook his hand, forcing a smile. "Nice to meet you," I said, pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. Marcus lingered near our group for most of the evening, chatting with Rachel in hushed tones when he thought I wasn't looking. At one point, I saw him staring at me, his expression a mix of guilt and realization. That's when it hit me. He knew something I didn't. When we got home that night, I couldn't stop replaying the evening in my head. Rachel acted like nothing had happened, laughing with the kids and scrolling through her phone. But I felt like a bomb had gone off in my chest. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing that my life was about to change forever. The morning after the welcome-home dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's reaction wasn't just casual surprise. It was something deeper, something that hinted at secrets Rachel didn't want me to uncover. I decided to dig. Rachel was out running errands, and the kids were at school. That gave me a few hours alone with her things. It felt wrong, snooping through her personal stuff, but after Marcus's slip-up, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in my head. I started with her phone, which was always glued to her hand. She had a passcode, of course, but luckily, I'd seen her unlock it a dozen times. My heart pounded as I typed it in. It worked. The Messages app was clean, too clean. No chats with Marcus, no incriminating texts. But as I scrolled through her emails, I found something odd. A reservation for a cabin, dated during her last assignment. She'd never mentioned a cabin, and the location wasn't anywhere near the base where she claimed she was stationed. My pulse quickened. The real bombshell was in her photo gallery. There, buried between pictures of sunsets and mission landscapes, was a selfie of Rachel and Marcus. They were in civilian clothes, standing close enough to make my stomach churn. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, her eyes glowing with a mix of excitement and intimacy. That's when I noticed the timestamp. It wasn't from her last assignment. It was from 2 months ago, during a week when she told me she had extra training sessions on base. My hands trembled as I closed the app and put the phone down. I felt like the walls were closing in. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. Rachel came home that afternoon, casually walking into the kitchen like she hadn't just shattered my world. I couldn't confront her yet, not without understanding the full story. Instead, I acted normal, asking her about her day and offering to cook dinner. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Cooking wasn't exactly my forte, but she didn't question it. If she was hiding something, she wasn't showing any cracks. Later that night, I waited until she fell asleep before opening her laptop. She rarely used it, but I had a hunch it might hold something her phone didn't. Sure enough, buried in her browser history, I found a social media profile for Marcus, one she'd viewed recently. Clicking on it, I scrolled through his posts, looking for any clue about their connection. Most of it was standard military stuff, pictures with his unit, motivational quotes, and photos of his dog. But then I hit the jackpot. A post from last month captioned, "The best team anyone could ask for," with a picture of him and Rachel. They were standing side by side, holding what looked like champagne glasses. He tagged the location, a fancy lodge in a nearby state. It wasn't even subtle. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to confront Rachel yet. Not until I had all the pieces of the puzzle. Instead, I reached out to Marcus. If anyone could give me the answers I needed, it was him. It didn't take long to get in touch. Marcus responded to my message with surprising politeness, agreeing to meet at a coffee shop that afternoon. As I sat there waiting for him, my nerves were shot. I didn't know what I was expecting, a confession, a fight? Whatever it was, I was ready. When Marcus walked in, he looked every bit the part of a soldier, straight-backed, confident, but with an edge of unease. He spotted me immediately and walked over. "John," he asked, extending a hand. I nodded, shaking it firmly. "Thanks for meeting me." We sat down, and I didn't waste any time. "Marcus, I know about you and Rachel." He stiffened, his eyes widening in shock. "I what? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice low but steady. "The pictures, the cabin. I know everything." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly flustered. "Look, I didn't know she was married. She never told me. If I'd known." I leaned back, studying his face. He looked genuinely upset, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," he admitted, avoiding my gaze. "We were partners on a mission, and things just happened. But I swear, if I'd known." "She wore her wedding ring." I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You didn't notice?" Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "She said it was complicated, that you two were separated but hadn't made it official yet." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Separated? We weren't even close to that. But now, I had a clearer picture of the lies Rachel had spun. "I need to ask you something," I said, leaning forward. "Did she ever mention the kids?" His face fell. "No, I didn't even know she had kids." That was the moment I realized Rachel's betrayal ran even deeper than I'd thought. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was erasing our family from her other life. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Rachel had no idea that Marcus had told me everything. As much as I wanted to confront her right then and there, I knew it wasn't the time. I needed to be smart about this. Revenge was starting to feel like a very real possibility. The days after my meeting with Marcus were a blur of calculated planning. Anger burned in my chest, but I kept it locked away, masking it with a calm exterior whenever Rachel was around. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. But then again, why would she? She had no reason to believe her secret was unraveling. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not until I had a plan that would ensure I had the upper hand. Rachel had lied to me, to our kids, and to Marcus. She'd spun a web of deceit, and now it was time to catch her in it. The first step was gaining access to her schedule. Rachel's military role meant she often worked odd hours, but she was meticulous about keeping track of her assignments and plans. Her calendar apps synced with our shared family account, so it wasn't hard to figure out when she'd be out of the house. I noticed a few training weekends coming up, and I couldn't help but wonder if they were as innocent as she claimed. To confirm my suspicions, I decided to track her movements. It sounds extreme, I know, but at this point I needed proof. I bought a GPS tracker online, a discreet one that I could attach to her car. It took me all of 5 minutes to install it one morning while she was in the shower. By the time she left the house that day, the tracker was active. Later that evening, I checked the app on my phone and saw her location history. She'd driven to the base as expected, but then taken a detour to a nearby cafe, one that just so happened to be close to Marcus's apartment. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. This wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to keep me digging. The second step was gathering allies. I needed someone I could trust, someone who'd help me navigate the storm without judgment. My best friend, Eric was the obvious choice. We've been tight since high school, and if anyone would have my back, it was him. When I told Eric what was going on, his reaction was immediate. She's cheating? On you? With some guy from the military? His voice was equal parts disbelief and anger. Man, I can't believe this. Believe it, I said, showing him the pictures and messages I collected. This is the guy Marcus. Eric shook his head, running a hand through his hair. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I want her to feel what I'm feeling right now. She lied to me, to the kids, to him even. She's been living this double life, and I'm done playing along. Eric nodded. Whatever you need, I'm here. Just say the word. The third step was the hardest, pretending everything was normal. Rachel was good at lying, but now I had to be just as good. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed the kids goodnight, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But I played my part, biding my time until the perfect opportunity presented itself. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, Rachel mentioned an upcoming training weekend at a base 2 hours away. I nodded, acting like I wasn't internally screaming. She left Friday morning, kissing me goodbye like she hadn't been tearing our family apart for months. As soon as she was out the door, I jumped into action. I checked the GPS tracker on her car, watching as she drove to the base. But then, as I suspected, she veered off course, heading toward the same lodge Marcus had posted about on social media. This wasn't just a coincidence. I called Eric. It's happening, I said. She's with him. What's the plan, he asked. I'm going there, I replied, my voice steady. I need to see this for myself, and then I'm going to make sure they never forget what they've done. When I arrived at the lodge, I parked a safe distance away and waited. The place was small and secluded, surrounded by dense woods. It was the perfect spot for someone trying to keep a secret. From my vantage point, I could see Rachel's car parked out front, alongside Marcus's. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to calm the storm raging inside me. A few hours later, I saw them. Rachel and Marcus stepped out of the lodge together, laughing and looking entirely too comfortable. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, one I bought for her back when we used to go on date nights. My stomach churned. They didn't see me as they walked to his car, likely heading out for dinner. This was the confirmation I needed, but I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. I had something bigger in mind. By the time I got home that night, my plan was in full swing. I'd already taken the first steps to gather everything I needed for the fallout. Bank records, text logs, and proof of her infidelity. But this wasn't just about exposing her. It was about showing Rachel and Marcus that actions have consequences. Revenge was no longer just an idea. It was a certainty. When Rachel came back from her training weekend, she was all smiles, acting as if she'd just come back from a routine military assignment. The kids ran to hug her, oblivious to the storm brewing under the surface. I played my part, asking about her trip and nodding along as she fed me a carefully rehearsed story about drills and simulations. But inside, I was already several steps ahead. The next week was all about laying the groundwork for what was coming. Rachel had no idea I'd spent the last few days gathering more than just proof of her affair. I was digging into her finances, her social media accounts, and even her work relationships. If she was going to lie to me, I wanted to know just how far her deception went. Step one was protecting myself. I met with a lawyer, laying out everything I'd uncovered so far. Pictures, texts, locations, my case was airtight. The lawyer, a sharp guy named Andrew, assured me that I was in a strong position. If she's hiding anything else, we'll find it, he said. And when we do, it'll only strengthen your case. Step two was setting up the confrontation. I didn't just want to call her out privately. I wanted to expose her lies in a way she wouldn't see coming. For that, I needed to rope in Marcus. He was the key to everything. After our first meeting, he seemed genuinely regretful, and I suspected he'd want to make things right, even if it meant turning on Rachel. I texted him, "I need your help. Can we talk?" To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. We arranged to meet at the same coffee shop as before. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "What's this about?" he asked as I sat down. "You said you didn't know Rachel was married," I began. "And I believe you. But now that you do, I need you to help me end this." Marcus frowned, shifting in his seat. "End it how?" "By being honest," I said, leaning forward. "She lied to both of us, Marcus. She used both of us. It's time she faces the consequences. He hesitated, glancing around the cafe like he was afraid someone might overhear. What do you want me to do? I'm planning a dinner, I explained. A family dinner. You'll be there. And when the time is right, we're going to tell Rachel exactly what we know. His eyes widened. You want me to confront her in front of your family? Yes, I said firmly. She's been lying to everyone, me, you, even our kids. It's time she owns up to it. Marcus looked like he wanted to bolt, but after a long pause, he nodded. All right, I'll do it. The dinner was set for the following Saturday. Rachel thought it was just another casual evening with friends, a chance to catch up and relax. Little did she know, I'd invited Marcus as the special guest. Eric and his wife were also coming, not because they knew the details, but because I wanted witnesses when everything went down. Rachel spent the day fussing over the house, making sure everything was perfect. Watching her go through the motions, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and pity. She had no idea the life she'd carefully constructed was about to crumble. When Marcus arrived, Rachel's reaction was immediate. Her smile faltered, and for a split second, panic flashed across her face. But she recovered quickly, greeting him with a forced cheerfulness. Marcus, I didn't expect to see you here. John invited me, he said, glancing at me. Hope that's okay. Of course, Rachel replied, her voice tight. The more, the merrier. The evening started off uneventfully. Rachel played the perfect hostess, laughing and chatting as if nothing was wrong. But I could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes flicked to Marcus whenever she thought no one was looking. She was on edge, and it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. When dinner was over and everyone was sitting around the table, I decided it was time. I cleared my throat, drawing everyone's attention. I want to thank you all for coming. I began, my voice calm but firm. But there's something I need to address. Rachel froze, her fork hovering midair. What's going on? She asked, her tone cautious. I looked directly at her. I know about you and Marcus. The room went silent. Rachel's face turned pale, her eyes darting between me and Marcus. What are you talking about? She stammered. You've been lying to me, Rachel, I said, my voice rising. About where you've been, about who you've been with. I know everything. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't say anything. I wasn't done yet. I know about the cabin, I continued. The weekends you spent with him instead of being on assignment. I've seen the pictures, Rachel. I've read the messages. Rachel's composure shattered. John, it's not what you think, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. I can explain. Don't, I interrupted. Don't insult me with more lies. The night ended with Rachel storming out, her carefully constructed life in ruins. Marcus left shortly after, offering a quiet apology before slipping out the door. Eric stayed behind, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. What now? He asked. Now, I said. I finished what I started. The aftermath of the dinner was chaotic, to say the least. Rachel had stormed out of the house, her phone buzzing endlessly as I ignored her increasingly frantic calls. She sent text after text, each one alternating between apologies and accusations. I didn't mean to hurt you, followed by, how could you humiliate me like that in front of everyone? Marcus, to his credit, had kept his distance since that night. He sent me one final message. I'm sorry for everything. I'm cutting ties with her for good. You won't hear from me again. I didn't respond. I didn't care about his regrets. My focus was on Rachel and making sure she felt the weight of every lie she'd told. The next morning, Rachel showed up unannounced. I'd barely slept, the events of the night replaying in my head on an endless loop. When I opened the door, she looked like a mess, her hair disheveled, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. John, please, she said, her voice breaking. We need to talk. I crossed my arms, keeping my tone cold. What's there to talk about? You've been lying to me for months. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't like that, she insisted. I didn't mean for it to happen. Marcus and I. Don't. I snapped, cutting her off. Don't try to justify it. You cheated, Rachel. You lied to me, to our kids, to him. You didn't just destroy our marriage. You destroyed our family. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. But I love you, John. I love our family. I don't want to lose you. Her words might have moved me months ago, but now, they felt hollow. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, I said. You made your choice, Rachel. Now, you have to live with it. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, focusing on the kids and my next move. Rachel tried to patch things up, but I wasn't interested in her apologies. I'd already contacted my lawyer, Andrew, who was helping me prepare for what came next. Divorce was inevitable, but I wanted to ensure it was on my terms. Step one was securing my assets. Rachel didn't know it, but I'd already frozen our joint accounts and started transferring my savings into a private account. If she thought she could walk away with half of everything, she was in for a rude awakening. Step two was gathering evidence for court. I combed through her phone records, emails, and the GPS logs from her car, building an ironclad case that would leave no room for doubt. Andrew assured me it would hold up in court. Judges don't take kindly to this kind of betrayal, he said, especially when there are kids involved. Step three, however, was personal. Revenge. Rachel needed to understand the pain she'd caused me, not just emotionally, but on a practical level. I wasn't just going to end our marriage. I was going to ensure she paid for her actions in a way she'd never forget. A week after the dinner, Rachel called me, asking to meet. She said she wanted to talk about the kids, about the house, about how we could move forward. I agreed, but only because I had my own agenda. We met at a park near the house, a neutral location. She arrived first, sitting on a bench with a folder in her lap. When I got there, she looked up at me with a mix of hope and desperation. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I sat down, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Rachel?" "I want to make this right," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes." I raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that? You think you can erase what you've done?" She shook her head, looking down at the folder in her lap. "I've been talking to a counselor," she said. "I know I messed up, but I want to fix things for us, for the kids. I'll do therapy. I'll be transparent. Stop," I interrupted. "It's too late for that." Her eyes widened. "John, please. Don't say that." "It's the truth," I said, my voice cold. "You didn't just betray me, Rachel. You lied to our kids. You lied to Marcus. You tore this family apart, and now you want to act like we can just glue it back together? It doesn't work like that." She started crying again, but I didn't flinch. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I continued. "I'm filing for divorce. The kids will stay with me. You can see them on weekends, if you prove you can be trusted." Her sobs grew louder. No, please don't do this." I stood up, looking down at her with a mixture of anger and pity. "You did this, Rachel. Not me." That night, I started putting my revenge plan into action. It wasn't enough to end the marriage. I wanted Rachel to feel the weight of her choices in every aspect of her life. The lies, the betrayal, the deceit. I was going to make sure it all came crashing down around her. After that meeting in the park, Rachel seemed shaken, but not entirely defeated. She still clung to the hope that she could fix things, that I might forgive her. But she didn't understand just how far I was willing to go to make her face the full weight of her betrayal. Forgiveness was off the table. This was war. The first part of my plan involved exposing Rachel to her most trusted circle, her colleagues. In the military, reputation is everything, especially for someone like Rachel, who had worked her way into a respected sniper unit. Her peers saw her as disciplined, loyal, and reliable. That image was about to shatter. I compiled a folder of evidence. Photos of her and Marcus together, logs from the GPS tracker showing their trips to the cabin, and screenshots of their messages. It wasn't hard to find the contact information for her commanding officer. I'd met the man at a few family events over the years. I sent the folder anonymously, ensuring my tracks were covered. I didn't include any direct accusations, just the facts. I figured the evidence would speak for itself. I didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. 2 days later, Rachel came home visibly rattled. She dropped her bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. I watched from the living room, pretending to read, while my heart raced with satisfaction. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. She glanced up, her eyes red. "Something's going on at work," she muttered. "There's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh," I said, setting down my book. "What kind of misunderstanding?" She hesitated, clearly torn between telling me the truth and keeping me in the dark. "Someone sent photos," she finally admitted, "of me and Marcus. They're saying it's inappropriate conduct. I could lose my position over this." I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself to appear neutral. "That's awful," I said. Who would do something like that? She shook her head, her expression a mix of anger and fear. I don't know. Someone's trying to ruin me. I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. Someone's trying to ruin me. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. She still had no idea I was behind it all. The next step in my plan was more personal, targeting the life she'd built outside of our family. Rachel prided herself on her social connections, book clubs, military family events, charity work. She loved being the center of attention, the woman everyone admired. I was about to pull the rug out from under her. Using an anonymous email account, I began spreading the story of her affair to the women in her social circles. I didn't have to embellish much. The facts were scandalous enough. I included just enough detail to make it clear that Rachel had betrayed not only me, but also her responsibilities as a mother and a soldier. The whisper started almost immediately. Rachel began receiving fewer invitations to events, and the ones she did attend were marked by awkward silences and sideways glances. She'd come home and vent about how people were acting weird around her, but I played dumb, nodding along and offering generic advice like, maybe it's just in your head. The turning point came one evening when Rachel confronted me outright. She was pacing the living room, her hands clenched into fists. "John," she said sharply, "do you know anything about what's been happening?" I raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "The photos, the emails, the rumors," she snapped. "Someone is out to get me. People are saying things, terrible things, and I don't know why." I shrugged, keeping my tone even. "Maybe it's karma." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, she just stared at me. "Karma? What's that supposed to mean?" I set down my coffee and stood up, meeting her gaze. "It means you reap what you sow, Rachel. You lied, you cheated, and now you're facing the consequences. Don't expect me to feel sorry for you." She took a step back, her expression a mix of shock and realization. You're behind this, aren't you?" I didn't answer right away, letting the silence hang between us like a loaded gun. Finally, I said, "I'm just making sure the truth comes out. You're the one who gave me the ammunition." Her face twisted with anger. "You're trying to destroy me." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone sees the truth." That night, Rachel packed a bag and left, muttering something about needing space. I didn't stop her. I wasn't even sure where she was going. Probably to one of her few remaining friends or, heaven forbid, Marcus. It didn't matter. She could run all she wanted, but the damage was already done. With Rachel out of the house, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of her lies pressing down on me. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more piece of the puzzle to address, Marcus. With Rachel out of the house, I turned my attention to the man who had played a significant part in the betrayal, Marcus. As much as Rachel's lies cut deep, Marcus's involvement was a wound that stung just as badly. He knew what he was doing, whether or not he claimed ignorance about Rachel's marital status. It was time to deal with him. The first thing I did was dig deeper into Marcus's life. While I already knew plenty from my earlier research, I needed more leverage. A few phone calls and some careful sleuthing revealed that Marcus wasn't the golden boy he appeared to be. There were rumors of disciplinary issues in his unit. Nothing major, but enough to raise eyebrows. He had a history of bending rules, and that was a thread I could pull. I reached out to a contact of mine who worked in military administration. Let's call him Ben. Ben and I had known each other since college, and while we weren't close, he owed me a favor from years back. I explained the situation in broad terms, leaving out the more personal details. "Look," I said, "this guy's been involved in some shady stuff, and I think it's time his commanding officer takes a closer look at his record." Ben didn't ask too many questions. Within a few days, I heard back from him. "You're not wrong," he said. "There's enough here to warrant an internal review. It'll be discreet, but if anything's there, they'll find it." That was all I needed. Marcus's career was now under a microscope, and whether or not he realized it, the clock was ticking. The next step was more personal. I wanted Marcus to know that I wasn't just sitting quietly in the background. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions. I sent him a message, keeping it short and to the point. "You think you can just walk away from this? You're about to find out otherwise. Good luck explaining yourself." It didn't take long for him to respond. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I told you. I'm done with Rachel. This isn't my problem anymore." I couldn't help but laugh at the arrogance in his reply. He still thought he could wash his hands of the situation and move on unscathed. "Oh, it's your problem," I replied. "You played your part, and now you'll deal with the consequences." Later that week, I got the news I'd been waiting for. Ben called me with an update. "Marcus has been pulled into a formal review," he said. "Nothing's finalized yet, but it's not looking good for him. Turns out there are some discrepancies in his reports, locations not matching up with his assignments, expenses that don't add up. It's a mess." I thanked Ben and hung up, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. Marcus's carefully curated image was starting to crack. I wasn't done yet. There was one more layer to my plan, something that would ensure Marcus couldn't just brush this off as a temporary setback. I reached out to a local journalist who specialized in military affairs. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah had a reputation for digging deep into stories, especially when it came to corruption or misconduct within the military. I gave her an anonymous tip about Marcus, pointing her toward the review and hinting at his involvement with Rachel. I didn't embellish or fabricate. I didn't need to. The facts were already damning. Sarah was intrigued. "If there's enough here, I'll run with it," she said. A week later, an article appeared in the local news. The headline read, "Rising Military Star Under Investigation for Misconduct." While the piece didn't explicitly name Rachel or the affair, it painted a clear picture of Marcus's questionable behavior. His reputation was now public fodder, and there was no escaping the scrutiny. Rachel called me the day after the article came out. "John, what did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied calmly. "Marcus is under investigation. His career is ruined." I let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe you should have thought about that before getting involved with a married woman. Actions have consequences, Rachel. You of all people should know that by now." "You're being vindictive," she spat. "No," I said firmly. "I'm making sure neither of you can hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." She hung up, but I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for her, or for Marcus. I was doing this for myself, for the life they had torn apart without a second thought. Marcus's life was unraveling, and Rachel's wasn't far behind. The house of cards they'd built together was collapsing, and I was finally starting to feel like I was reclaiming control. But the game wasn't over yet. There was one more move to make. One final blow that would ensure Rachel understood the full weight of her betrayal. That'd be why the time Marcus's downfall was in full swing. Rachel's life was already teetering on the edge. The military investigation into Marcus had set off ripples that were beginning to reach her. Her commanding officer wasn't blind to the whispers surrounding her role in the affair, and she'd been pulled aside for a friendly conversation about professionalism and conduct. Rachel came to me again, desperate and angry, her demeanor shifting between pleading for forgiveness and blaming me for ruining her life. I was tired of the theatrics. I told her I had no interest in playing the victim anymore. "John," she said, pacing the living room like a caged animal, "you've made your point. I messed up. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix this, but you don't have to destroy me in the process." "I'm not destroying you, Rachel," I replied coldly. "You did that all on your own." The truth was Rachel still hadn't fully grasped the weight of what she'd done, not just to me, but to our kids. She thought this was just about the affair, about her betrayal of me as a husband. What she didn't see was how her actions had ripped apart the fabric of our family. I decided it was time to make her understand. The first step was preparing the kids for what was coming. This was the part one dreaded the most. As much as I wanted to shield them from the ugliness of the situation, they deserved the truth, or at least a version of it they could handle. One evening, I sat them down in the living room. Emily, our youngest, looked up at me with wide, curious eyes, while Jake, our teenager, folded his arms, sensing the seriousness of the moment. "Dad, what's going on?" Jake asked. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about your mom and me," I began. "Things between us haven't been good for a while, and we've decided that we can't stay married." Emily's face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. Jake, ever the stoic one, just stared at me, his jaw tight. "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling. "There are things that have happened, mistakes that can't be fixed," I said carefully, choosing my words. "But I want you both to know that none of this is your fault. Your mom and I both love you more than anything, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you're okay." Emily sobbed into my shoulder, while Jake looked away, blinking hard to keep from crying. I hugged them both tightly, promising that I'd always be there for them, no matter what. The second step was setting the stage for the final confrontation with Rachel. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, protecting my assets, and laying the groundwork for the divorce. Now it was time to present everything to her. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I asked her to meet me at the house one evening, under the pretense of discussing logistics for the kids. When she arrived, she looked wary, like she knew something was coming but couldn't put her finger on it. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, gesturing for her to sit. "About everything that's happened. About us." She sat down cautiously, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. And I've decided I'm done playing nice," I said, sliding a folder across the table toward her. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were copies of everything. The GPS logs, the photos, the financial statements showing her unapproved withdrawals from our joint accounts, and even the emails she thought she'd deleted. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages. "John, what is this?" she whispered. "It's everything you've done," I said. "Every lie you've told. Every step you took to cover your tracks. It's all here, Rachel." Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want you to see the mess you've made," I said, my voice steady. "I want you to understand that this isn't just about you and Marcus. This is about the life we built together, the life you destroyed." She sat there in silence, her shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked genuinely defeated. "I'm filing for divorce," I continued. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The kids will stay with me, and you'll get supervised visitation until I'm convinced you can be trusted again. As for the finances, you'll get what you're legally entitled to. Nothing more." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. "You can hate me for this if you want," I said. "But you don't get to play the victim anymore. You made your choices, Rachel. Now, you'll deal with the consequences." That night, after she left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. The anger I'd been carrying for months had finally started to lift, replaced by a sense of clarity. Rachel's betrayal had broken something in me, but it hadn't destroyed me. The kids and I were already planning a fresh start. A new house, a new school, and a life free from the lies that had poisoned our family. But as I packed up the pieces of my old life, I couldn't help but wonder if Rachel would ever truly understand the depth of the damage she'd caused. The days following my confrontation with Rachel were strangely calm. The storm I'd been living in for months had passed, leaving behind a quiet, empty space that felt both liberating and unfamiliar. Rachel had moved out and was staying with a friend, leaving the kids and me to settle into a new rhythm. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. There was still the divorce, the custody battle, and the final unraveling of the life we'd built together. The first hurdle was telling our extended family. Rachel and I had always presented a united front to our relatives, a happy, stable family. Breaking the news to them felt like tearing off a Band-Aid. I started with my parents. Over coffee at their house, I laid it all out. The affair, the lies, the divorce. My mom gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, while my dad's face darkened with anger. "John," my mom said, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "None of us did," I said. She hid it well. My dad, who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward, his expression grim. "What can we do to help?" "Just be there for the kids," I said. "They're taking it hard, and I want to make this as smooth as possible for them." My parents nodded, promising their support. As hard as it was to talk about, it felt good to have them in my corner. Rachel's family was a different story. They'd always been polite but distant, and I wasn't sure how they'd react. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Rachel's sister, Monica, called me a few days later. "John," she said, her tone sharp, "I just heard from Rachel. She said you're dragging her through the mud." "What the hell is going on?" "Dragging her through the mud?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Did she tell you about the affair? About how she lied to me and the kids for months?" Monica was silent for a moment, then sighed. "She mentioned something, but she's your wife. Aren't you supposed to work through these things?" "Not when she's the one who burned it all down," I said coldly. "I'm not the bad guy here, Monica. She made her bed, and now she gets to lie in it." Monica didn't push further, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. That was fine by me. I wasn't looking for her approval. The next step was the custody arrangement. Rachel had always been a good mother, or so I'd thought, but her recent behavior raised questions about her judgment. My lawyer, Andrew, was confident we could secure primary custody. "Given the evidence we have," Andrew said during one of our meetings, It's clear that Rachel's actions have been detrimental to the family. Judges take that seriously. Rachel, of course, didn't see it that way. During our first mediation session, she fought tooth and nail for joint custody. "I've always been there for the kids," she argued. "This affair doesn't change that." "It absolutely changes that," I countered. "You weren't just unfaithful. You were dishonest with our entire family. The kids deserve stability, and I'm the one who can provide that." The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense attitude, took notes as we went back and forth. By the end of the session, it was clear Rachel wasn't going to back down easily. Outside the courtroom, Rachel cornered me in the parking lot. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Because it's what's best for the kids," I said, keeping my tone steady. Her eyes filled with tears. "I've already lost so much, John. Please don't take them away from me." For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything, Rachel was still their mother. But I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. "I'm not trying to take them away," I said. "But you need to prove that you can put them first, above everything else." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away, wiping her eyes as she went. The final step in cutting ties with Rachel was dividing our assets. This was where things got messy. Despite the evidence of her infidelity, she still expected an equal share of everything. Our house, our savings, even the retirement account I'd worked so hard to build. "I contributed to this family too," she argued during one of our meetings with the lawyers. "And then you tore it apart," I shot back. The negotiation dragged on for weeks, with neither of us willing to budge. Eventually, we reached a compromise. I kept the house and the bulk of our savings, while she took a smaller settlement and some of the shared assets. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough to give me and the kids a fresh start. By the time the dust settled, Rachel's life was unrecognizable. The affair had cost her her standing at work, her reputation among friends, and the family she'd once taken for granted. Marcus, as far as I knew, was still dealing with the fallout of his own choices. For the kids and me, life was finally starting to stabilize. We were planning a move to a new house in a nearby town, a chance to leave the past behind and build something new. But as I packed the last of Rachel's belongings into a box, I couldn't help but wonder if she'd ever truly understood the depth of the pain she'd caused. The first morning in our new house felt surreal. The kids were still adjusting to the move, their emotions swinging between excitement and sadness. Jake, my teenager, helped me unpack, his headphones permanently glued to his ears as he tackled box after box. Emily, on the other hand, clung to me like a shadow, asking endless questions about where things should go and whether we'd decorate her new room with the same pink curtains she'd had in the old house. For me, the new house was a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the memories of a home that had become a battleground. But even as I hung pictures on the walls and arranged furniture in the living room, the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the back of my mind. The first real test of this new chapter came when Rachel came to pick up the kids for her first supervised visit. The court had granted her weekends, provided she adhered to specific guidelines. No overnights, no contact with Marcus, and strict boundaries around communication with the kids. When she pulled into the driveway, I could see the strain on her face. She was trying to hold herself together, but the cracks were obvious. Emily ran to her, throwing her arms around her neck, while Jake hung back, his expression unreadable. "Hi, John," Rachel said cautiously, her tone softer than I'd heard in months. "Rachel," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced at Jake, offering him a tentative smile. "You ready to go?" Jake shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Yeah, I guess." As they drove away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and anxiety. The kids needed their mother, but I couldn't shake the fear that Rachel would find a way to pull them into her chaos. While the kids were gone, I took some time to focus on myself, a luxury I hadn't had in years. I went for long runs, cleared out old files and mementos from the past, and even reconnected with a few friends I'd drifted away from during the marriage. One evening, Eric, my best friend, and one of the few people who'd stuck by me through everything, invited me out for drinks. "You seem lighter," he said as we clinked glasses at the bar. "I feel lighter," I admitted. For the first time in months, I'm not looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster. Eric grinned. "Good. Because you deserve better than what you've been dealing with. Seriously, John, you're finally getting your life back." His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. For so long, I'd been consumed by Rachel's betrayal and the fallout from it. Now, for the first time, I had a chance to focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. The kids returned Sunday evening, their moods markedly different. Emily was cheerful, chattering nonstop about the park Rachel had taken them to. Jake, however, was quieter than usual. "Everything okay, bud?" I asked as we unloaded their bags. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it's fine." But later that night, as I was tucking Emily into bed, Jake appeared in the doorway. "Dad," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said, stepping out into the hallway with him. He leaned against the wall, his hands jammed into his pockets. "Mom asked me if I wanted to live with her." My stomach dropped. "She what?" "She said she's getting a new place and that I could have my own room there," he continued, avoiding my gaze. "She made it sound, I don't know, like it'd be better than here." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my anger in check. "What did you say?" "I told her no," he said quickly. "I don't want to live with her. I thought you should know." I nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thanks for telling me, Jake. And for the record, I'm really proud of you." His lips twitched into a small smile. "Thanks, Dad." That night, I called my lawyer. "We need to talk about Rachel's visitation," I said. Andrew sighed. "I was afraid this might happen. If she's trying to manipulate the kids, we can request a modification to the custody agreement. But you'll need proof." I thought back to Jake's words, the discomfort on his face as he told me about Rachel's proposal. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to keep me vigilant. The following weeks were a mix of progress and challenges. The kids started to settle into the new house, and I found myself rediscovering the joys of single parenthood. Cooking pancakes on Saturday mornings, helping Emily with her school projects, and taking Jake to soccer practice. But Rachel's attempts to undermine me didn't stop. She began sending me messages, accusing me of turning the kids against her. "You're poisoning them against me," she wrote one evening. "You're making it impossible for me to rebuild a relationship with them." I didn't respond. There was no point. The turning point came when Jake overheard one of her phone calls. She was talking to someone, likely a friend, complaining about how unfair the custody arrangement was. Jake, ever the quiet observer, recorded the conversation on his phone. "Dad," he said, showing me the audio file. "I thought you might need this." As I listened to Rachel's words, a cold clarity settled over me. She wasn't just frustrated. She was planning to fight me for custody. Rachel's escalation didn't come as a surprise, but it still hit hard when the official notice arrived. A letter from her lawyer landed in my mailbox, outlining her intent to modify the custody agreement. She wanted joint custody with equal time, claiming that it was in the children's best interest to spend more time with her. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, while Emily and Jake played outside. My first instinct was to march over to her and confront her, but I knew better. This was no longer a matter of heated words. It was a legal battle, and I had to approach it with strategy, not emotion. I called Andrew immediately. "She's trying to push for joint custody," I said, my voice tight with frustration. Andrew sighed on the other end of the line. "It's not unexpected. Judges generally prefer joint custody unless there's a clear reason to deny it. But we have a solid case. Between her affair, her questionable behavior, and Jake's account of her manipulations, we have leverage." "What do I need to do?" I asked. "We'll need to gather everything. Text messages, recordings, the GPS logs, anything that shows her instability or failure to prioritize the kids' well-being. And Jake's recording of her phone call? That could be a game changer." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Let's do it." The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the most stressful of my life. Between work, parenting, and preparing for court, I barely had time to sleep. Rachel, meanwhile, doubled down on her attempts to paint herself as the ideal mother. She started attending every school event, signing up for PTA committees, and posting pictures of herself with the kids on social media, complete with captions like "family is everything." It was infuriating, but I refused to take the bait. I focused on what mattered, proving that the kids were better off with me as their primary parent. The day of the hearing arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Rachel sat across from me, looking polished and composed, her lawyer whispering in her ear. I, too, had dressed the part, determined to show the judge that I was a capable and responsible father. The proceedings began with both sides presenting their arguments. Rachel's lawyer emphasized her role as a loving mother, highlighting her recent efforts to be more involved in the kids' lives. Ms. Harper has always been a dedicated parent, her lawyer said, gesturing toward her. She recognizes that she made mistakes in the past, but she has taken significant steps to rebuild her relationship with her children. Joint custody is in their best interest. When it was our turn, Andrew calmly presented our case, laying out the evidence of Rachel's dishonesty and manipulative behavior. He played the audio recording Jake had made, in which Rachel admitted to strategizing ways to sway the kids in her favor. The judge listened carefully, her expression neutral but attentive. When the recording ended, she glanced at Rachel, who looked visibly shaken. "Mr. Harper," the judge said, turning to me, "how do you feel this situation has impacted your children?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Your Honor, this has been incredibly difficult for them. They've seen their mother make choices that put her needs above theirs, and that's not something I take lightly. My priority has always been their stability and well-being. I'm not trying to cut Rachel out of their lives, but I believe they need consistency right now, and I can provide that." After hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge made her ruling. She acknowledged Rachel's efforts to improve, but ultimately sided with me, granting me primary custody. Rachel would continue to have weekend visitation, but her attempt at joint custody was denied. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This battle was over, and for the first time in months, I felt like the kids and I could finally move forward. Rachel confronted me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "This isn't fair, John," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm their mother. They need me." "They do need you," I said evenly. "But they also need stability. And right now, that's what I can give them." She didn't argue further, just turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. When we got home that evening, I sat Jake and Emily down to explain the outcome. Jake seemed relieved, while Emily asked if she'd still get to see her mom. "Of course," I assured her. "This doesn't mean you won't see her. It just means you'll be living here most of the time. We'll make sure you get plenty of time with Mom, too." She nodded, satisfied, and climbed onto my lap for a hug. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you, too," I said, holding her close. The aftermath of the custody hearing left a strange quiet in our lives. For the first time in months, there were no letters from lawyers, no court dates looming on the horizon, and no fights waiting to erupt. It was just me, Jake, Emily, and the weight of a fresh start. Rachel had taken the judge's ruling hard. I could see it in her eyes whenever she came to pick up the kids for her weekend visits. She looked defeated, like a soldier who'd fought a battle they never truly believed they could win. But she kept things civil, which I appreciated, even if her smile for the kids was tinged with sadness. At home, the kids were adjusting to the new normal. Jake had started to come out of his shell, spending more time with his friends and less time brooding in his room. Emily, ever the optimist, seemed happy as long as we had her favorite macaroni and cheese and movie nights on the couch. One evening, as we sat eating dinner, Jake put down his fork and cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, his tone serious, "are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Happy?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, shifting in his seat. "Like with how things are now. With everything." I glanced at Emily, who was busy doodling on a napkin, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. Then I looked back at Jake. "I think I'm getting there," I said honestly. "It's been a tough year, but we're in a better place now. And having you and Emily with me makes all the difference." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I just want things to feel normal again, you know? They will, I promised. It might take some time, but we'll get there. Together." The next step in rebuilding our lives was creating new traditions, things that were just ours, without any ties to the past. One Saturday, I surprised the kids with a day trip to the mountains. "Where are we going?" Emily asked as I packed snacks into a cooler. "It's a surprise," I said with a grin. When we arrived at the trailhead, Jake groaned. "Hiking? Seriously?" "Trust me," I said. "It'll be worth it." The hike was challenging, especially for Emily, whose legs weren't quite built for steep inclines. But when we reached the summit, the view took our breath away. We stood together, looking out over a sea of rolling hills and trees, the sun casting a golden glow over everything. "This is amazing," Jake admitted, pulling out his phone to snap a picture. Emily grabbed my hand, her eyes wide with awe. "Can we come here again?" "Absolutely," I said, smiling down at her. Meanwhile, Rachel seemed to be struggling with her own version of moving on. She'd rented a small apartment across town and started attending counseling sessions. Occasionally, she'd text me updates about the kids, photos from their weekend outings, questions about their schedules, but our conversation stayed strictly about parenting. One day, she called unexpectedly. "John," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" I frowned. "What's this about?" I want to apologize," she said. "For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, the way I hurt you and the kids. I know I can't undo it, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Her words took me by surprise. Rachel wasn't one to admit fault easily, and hearing her say those things felt like a step toward closure. "I appreciate that," I said after a pause. "But what's done is done. The best thing you can do now is focus on being there for the kids." "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I really am." The more time passed, the more I realized how much I'd learned from everything that had happened. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to value honesty, and to lean on the people who truly cared about me. Most importantly, I'd learned that healing wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about finding strength in spite of it. One night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, I thought about what the future might look like. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Weeks turned into months, and the sharp edges of the past started to dull. The routines we'd built in the new house began to feel natural, almost comforting. Mornings were filled with chaos, like Jake arguing over who finished the last of the cereal, or Emily insisting her ponytail wasn't just right. Evenings became a time to unwind, whether it was family movie night or Jake trying to teach me the latest video game, which I was hopeless at. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were settling into something that resembled peace. One Saturday, while dropping the kids off at Rachel's for their weekend visit, she pulled me aside. "John, wait," she said as I was about to leave. I turned back, keeping my expression neutral. "What is it?" She hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about the way I handled things, with the kids." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm trying to be better. For them. And maybe for myself, too." It wasn't the first time Rachel had apologized, but there was something different about the way she said it this time. It felt less like a plea for redemption and more like an acknowledgement of the damage she'd done. "I hope you mean that," I said finally. "Because the kids deserve your best. That's all I care about now." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "They'll get it. I promise." After dropping the kids off, I decided to take some time for myself. It had been a while since I'd done anything just for me, so I went to a local coffee shop I used to frequent before life got so complicated. As I sipped my coffee, a woman at the next table caught my eye. She was sketching in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up briefly, and our eyes met. "Nice day, isn't it?" she said, offering a friendly smile. "It is," I replied, surprised at how easily the words came out. We ended up chatting for a while, exchanging stories about the town, the best hiking spots, and how she was a graphic designer who had just moved to the area. Her name was Kate, and she had an easygoing warmth that put me at ease. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought about Kate. I wasn't ready to dive into anything new, not after everything that had happened. But talking to her had reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. The kids returned the next day, full of stories about their weekend with Rachel. Emily talked nonstop about how they baked cookies, while Jake mentioned that Rachel had taken them to a new arcade in town. "It was actually kind of fun," Jake admitted, though he quickly added, "but it's still better here." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Good to know, bud." Over the following weeks, I started noticing small changes in Rachel. She seemed more attentive during her visits with the kids, more engaged in their lives. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was enough to give me hope that maybe she was starting to prioritize what really mattered. Meanwhile, I found myself focusing more on my own growth. I started to go to the gym again, picked up reading, and even joined a local hiking group. It felt good to reconnect with parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of the past year. One evening, while helping Emily with her homework, she looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, are you happy now?" Her question stopped me in my tracks. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because you smile more now," she said simply. "I like it when you smile." I pulled her into a hug, my chest tightening. "I like it too," I said softly. Life continued to steady itself little by little. The chaos of the past year felt like a distant memory some days, and an open wound on others. But for the first time, I was starting to feel like myself again. I'd found a rhythm with the kids, a balance between work and home life, and even moments of joy in the simplest things, like watching Emily try and fail to teach our dog Max to fetch, or listening to Jake rant about a bad call during a soccer game. One weekend, while the kids were at Rachel's, I decided to join the hiking group I'd recently discovered. It was an informal group that met on Saturday mornings, mostly locals looking to escape the hum of the town for a few hours. To my surprise, Kate, the woman I'd met at the coffee shop, was there. "Well, fancy seeing you here," she said, adjusting the straps of her backpack with a playful grin. "Didn't take you for a hiker," I replied, falling in a step beside her as the group began the trail. We chatted easily as we climbed, sharing stories about favorite trails and embarrassing moments from past hikes. It was effortless in a way I hadn't experienced in years, and by the time we reached the summit, I realized I'd spent most of the hike smiling. As the group dispersed at the end of the trail, Kate lingered. "Hey," she said, her tone a little more serious. "A few of us are grabbing lunch in town. You should come." I hesitated for a moment, the familiar tug of doubt creeping in. Was I ready to start putting myself out there again? But then I thought about the past year. The pain, the growth, the promise I'd made to myself to keep moving forward. "Sure," I said finally. "Why not?" Lunch was lively, a mix of laughter and lighthearted banter. Kate and I ended up sitting at the same table, our conversation flowing as easily as it had on the trail. By the time the check came, she was scribbling her number on a napkin. "In case you want to hike again sometime," she said, sliding it across the table with a wink. I took it, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I'll keep that in mind." That evening, as I sat on the couch flipping through channels, I stared at the napkin sitting on the coffee table. It had been years since I'd thought about dating. The idea felt foreign, almost impossible. Yet here was this napkin, a simple piece of paper that represented something I hadn't considered in a long time: possibility. When the kids came home the next day, they brought with them their usual whirlwind of energy. Emily ran straight to Max, who barked happily at her arrival, while Jake tossed his backpack onto the couch and flopped down beside it. "How was Mom's?" I asked, handing him a water bottle. "Fine," he said with a shrug. Then, after a pause, he added, "She's different now." I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I don't know," he said, frowning. "She's just like trying harder. She asked me about school and stuff. Like, actually cared about my answers. That's a good thing, right?" I asked carefully. Jake shrugged again. "Yeah, I guess." I didn't press him further, but his words stayed with me. Maybe Rachel really was trying to change. Later that night, as I was tucking Emily into bed, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "do you think you'll ever get married again?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because I want you to be happy," she said, yawning. "And maybe someone else could help with that." Her words stayed with me long after she fell asleep. It wasn't about getting married again. It was about being open to the possibility of happiness, however it might come. The next morning, I picked up the napkin from the coffee table and added Kate's number to my phone. "Hey," I texted, "any good trails coming up?" Kate replied almost immediately to my text, her enthusiasm jumping off the screen. "Plenty. There's a great trail just outside town. How about this weekend?" I stared at the message for a moment, feeling the faint flutter of nerves. This wasn't just a hike anymore. It felt like a step towards something new. "Sounds good," I replied, trying to keep it casual. The weekend arrived quickly, and before I knew it, I was lacing up my boots and heading out to meet Kate at the trailhead. She greeted me with her signature smile, the kind that felt warm enough to melt away any lingering doubts. "You ready for this?" she asked, playfully nudging my arm. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said with a grin. The trail wound through dense woods, sunlight streaming through the trees in patches of gold. We talked as we walked about our families, our pasts, and what brought us to this small corner of the world. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing pieces of my story that I hadn't spoken aloud since everything fell apart. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," Kate said gently as we paused at a scenic overlook. "Yeah," I admitted, leaning against a tree, "but I think I'm finally starting to see the other side of it." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That's a good place to be." By the end of the hike, it felt like something had shifted. It wasn't just about Kate. It was about me realizing that I could connect with someone again, that I wasn't as closed off as I'd feared. As we said our goodbyes, Kate hesitated. So, dinner next time? I chuckled. Moving on from hiking already? She laughed, shaking her head. Not at all. Just thought I'd mix it up. Dinner sounds great, I said, surprising myself with how easy the words came. Back at home, the kids were eager to hear about my day. Emily bombarded me with questions, while Jake smirked knowingly. You were gone a while, he said. Must have been a good hike. It was, I replied simply, ruffling his hair. Are you going to see her again? Emily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Maybe, I said with a smile. We'll see. Meanwhile, Rachel's visits with the kids continued to improve. She seemed more patient, more present, and the kids were starting to notice. Emily came home one evening clutching a drawing she'd made during her weekend at Rachel's, of the three of them baking cookies. She said she's going to make us matching aprons next time, Emily exclaimed, her excitement contagious. That's great, sweetheart, I said, giving her a hug. Even Jake, who had been more skeptical of Rachel's attempts, admitted that she was trying harder and less weird about stuff. One evening, as I sat with Andrew to finalize some paperwork related to the custody arrangement, I couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come. You've handled this better than most people would, Andrew said, scanning through the documents. I don't know about that, I said. I've made my fair share of mistakes. Maybe, he said, looking up at me. But you put the kids first through all of it. That's what matters. The night before my dinner with Kate, Jake came to sit beside me on the couch. Are you nervous? He asked, his tone teasing. A little, I admitted. You'll do fine, he said, giving me a rare smile. Thanks, bud, I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Dinner with Kate was simple, easy, and filled with laughter. She shared stories about her design projects, while I told her about Emily's attempts to train our dog and Jake's obsession with soccer. You've got a great family, she said as we finished dessert. I think so too, I said, smiling. As we walked out of the restaurant, she paused, looking up at me. I had a good time, she said. Me too, I replied. For a moment, we stood there, the air between us charged with something unspoken. Then she leaned in and kissed me, soft, simple, and full of promise. When I got home, the kids were asleep, and the house was quiet. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in, the life we'd built, the steps we'd taken, and the path still ahead. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to find out.